to start off the video by complaining, but today there was a winter storm. So the hospital closed, like all non-essential staff were ordered to stay home. So I was like, great, I get to work remote. I love working remote. I love sitting in my studio apartment being warm and cozy with my cat. But then an emergency happened and I had to go into the hospital and all the buses were delayed, the subway was delayed, the trolley was delayed. So I was like, God damn it, what am I gonna do? So I walked to work. The weather app told me it was 29 degrees. Well, according to the app, it says it felt like 17 degrees. And let me tell you, it felt like zero. Felt like 0 degrees. Anyways, I'm back from work and I'm here to talk about my media recap of 2023. Is it the end of January 2024? Yes. Do I care? No. So I know I've already made 2 Instagram posts about this, but consider this the long form extended version of that, where I get to talk to you more about my thoughts, why I chose what I chose, etc, etc, etc. Because I feel like Instagram is not a great platform to have like long extended thoughts about certain forms of media. I actually got 2 DMs from 2 different people saying that I'm long-winded and I talk too much for my article recommendation posts. They're like, why can't you just post the article that you recommend and that's it, without like that chunky block of text to get in the way? And yeah, I do have a lot of thoughts. I do have a lot of opinions, but whatever, I'm just gonna speak my truth. I do have my iPad and my phone up so that I can reference my story graph and the notes that I took on my books and like my book tracker and whatever. So I will be looking down. We're gonna start out starting with books though. In 2023, I read a total of 24 books, and those were only books that I read for fun, because in 2023, I was still in school, and as an anthropology major, I would regularly read like 3 books every single week for class. I would honestly say, like during my double credit seminar, as well as when I was writing my thesis, that number could shoot up to 5 books a week. So it just got to the point where tracking all of my like academic books got to be too much. So I only selected books that I read for fun. My average rating was apparently a 3.7 with 4 books rated 5 stars and 1 book rated a 1. I did change my rating system halfway through the year to 5 stars being like books that I love beyond belief, like books that left a really lasting impact on me and things that I like thought about for days after reading the book. 4 stars being books I really enjoyed. 3 stars being books that were just like fine, like not great, but not like bad either, just like straight up mid. 2 being books that I didn't really enjoy, and then 1 star being books being like total fill. I think that my rating is a little skewed from last year because I changed halfway through, but I just wanted to talk about the books I rated 5 stars versus 1 star. We're gonna start off spicy with the 1 star book I rated, which was Cain by Jose Saramago. It's just a book about Cain arguing with God for 158 pages. That's it, that's the book. The first thing I did not like about the book was the writing style. That made the entire reading experience to be very difficult for me, and I just really did not like it. I know that the author is like an award-winning author or whatever, like I'm sure like this writing style has like something deeper to say about the story, but it was so hard to read for me, and even though it was a short book, it felt like a slog to read because I just couldn't get behind the style at all. Granted, I am a hypocrite because I never capitalize whenever I like post something on the internet, and I read books like Severance by Ling Ma, which has no, or books like, you know, Conversations with Friends by Sally Rooney. They don't have quotation marks in them. But Cain was just to the point where like I could not tolerate it, you know? In terms of the actual plot, it basically goes through the Cain and Abel story where Cain gets like cast out and like he wanders the earth, and the book follows him during like the course of his immortal life as he argues with God and like gets into like this weird thing with Lilith. And I don't know, I get that it's supposed to be satirical. The God in this book is like pretty snarky, cunty if we think about it, but the satire, like normally when people write satire, I expect it to have like some point about like the broader picture, right? But this book didn't really feel like it was doing that. Instead, it felt like Cain and God were slinging like silly little one-liners, and then suddenly we get like a page about like Lilith's boobs or whatever, and then we just move on from that without ever really expanding on what that means. It just wasn't my favorite. I really hated it. I was thinking about rating it 2 stars, but just the sheer frustration of having to read through that book made me downgrade it to 1 star. Now let's move on to something more positive with my 5-star books. First up, we have A Thousand Splendid Suns by Khaled Hosseini. This book made me feel like the scene in Little Women where Saoirse Ronan goes, "Women!" Because truly, like, I felt so emotional for Mariam and Lila, the 2 main female characters of the book, and just their endurance, their resilience of how they've experienced violence and trauma in their lives and how they managed to overcome it in spite of everything. The sisterhood that they developed together. I really have no words to describe how deep of an emotional impact this book had on me. Like a compass needle that points north, a man's accusing finger always finds a woman. Like, that really hit for me. A man's heart is a wretched, wretched thing. It isn't like a mother's womb. It won't bleed. It won't stretch to make room for you. Wow. The next 5-star book I want to talk about is called What We Don't Talk About When We Talk About Fat by Aubrey Gordon. So I first heard of Aubrey Gordon during one of my medical anthropology lectures on eating disorders and body dysmorphia, where a classmate had recommended this podcast called Maintenance Phase. And at the time I was like, oh, I want to like listen to more podcasts, let me take a listen to it. And I really hated it because at that time I still had very like deeply seated notions of like what it means to be healthy, what fat means to me. Like, I still really strongly believed in the obesity epidemic, and at that point I was still like resistant to sort of unlearning some of the thinking patterns I had from my eating disorder. So I ended up, you know, shelving the podcast and thinking like, I don't want to listen to it, I don't want to unlearn anything, like I am fine the way that I am. And then once I started entering more active recovery for my CPTSD and my eating disorder, I revisited this podcast and it was really revolutionary for me. Aubrey Gordon's work and like the other authors that she's introduced me to via her podcast, you know, like Belly of the Beast and Hunger by Roxane Gay. Her work and other like fat activists' work have really helped me reshape my own thinking, and it's helped me a lot with my own like eating disorder recovery. So when I heard that she was publishing a book, I was like, oh my god, I have to read it immediately. This book in particular is a blend of memoir, social critique, and like the typical like data and science research that she often cites in Maintenance Phase with her co-host Michael Hobbs. She describes how fatness exists in Western society, the discrimination that arises from anti-fat bias. Personally, I found this to be such a moving book. I really like it when she includes these personal anecdotes and these stories of how she's experienced anti-fat bias, because I find that makes it really compelling for me. I can see this book being easily digestible for other readers because she writes in a very approachable manner. Like, she doesn't use a lot of jargon. She is just very straightforward in her writing. I think this book is really accessible for a lot of people. However, if you are an avid listener of Maintenance Phase like I am, I feel like this book doesn't really bring up anything new. She mentions a lot of the same anecdotes in her book as she does in her podcast. So for me, there wasn't anything new, but I still really enjoyed reading it. I also like this book far more than her second book, which is called You Just Need to Lose Weight and 19 Other Myths About Fat People. That book is structured more as like a workbook or a primer for people who are new to unlearning anti-fat bias. So for me, that wasn't a very compelling book. I think that would be useful for someone looking for a workbook or a starting point on how to unlearn their bias, but not very good in terms of people who want like an enjoyable reading experience or just want to read a book straight through from start to finish. This is a book that I didn't include in my original post because it was a book that I had to read for school, but I loved it so much. It was like the book of 2023. Like, I couldn't stop thinking about this book for ages, and it's called Beast at Every Threshold by Natalie Wee. It's a poetry book, so I know for people who aren't into poetry, it's kind of a hard sell, but she just has such a visceral and haunting way of writing that makes it really stick. Like, each poem, it made me think so much. She writes about like family and like the Asian diaspora, the immigrant experience, queerness, about loss and grief. And it's just beautiful writing. It's sharp, it's to the point, it's incisive, it's visceral. She uses a lot of metaphors about the body, about the flesh, about hunger to talk about queerness and diaspora. And it's just something that I really resonated with, and I loved her poetry so much. What I really liked about this book is just how the author manages to humanize undocumented people without turning it into trauma porn. Like what we don't talk about when we talk about Fat, it's a blend of memoir and social critique where she talks about her interviews that she did with undocumented immigrants from different locations, and she sort of adds like her own experiences as being a DACA kid and how that influenced her life. It was a very sobering read, to be sure. It touches on a lot of like heavy, dark subjects that are difficult to read. However, she doesn't shy away from that. She doesn't sugarcoat anything, but again, toes the line so well between being honest about the struggles that undocumented people face while not making it trauma porn. I did see one review that described her prose as caustic, quick, and simmering with righteous anger. And while I agree, I think that description also diminishes some of the tender moments in her book. Like, her style of writing is just honest. That's the best way I can put it. It's just really honest and open about the things that happen to undocumented people. And to reduce that to anger makes it feel like, you know, she's being pigeonholed as like this angry author of color, when in reality she's just truthfully portraying experiences of undocumented people, and as well as like her own personal experiences. I think this is a book that made me realize I really enjoy reading memoirs if they're done well. If they're done well. I've read a couple of like memoir-esque books that I didn't really enjoy as much, but it made me realize I really like it when an author is able to add anecdotes and experiences that relate to what they're writing about, because to me it makes it feel a little more real to me, and it makes me feel like the author has like a stake in what they are writing about. The next book is called Light in Gaza, Writings Born of Fire, and it's an anthology of various essays, short stories, and poems written by Palestinian writers. And the editor, Jihad Abu Salim, begins the introduction by talking about the barriers that separate Gaza. So not only just the physical barriers preventing people from going in and out freely, but also the intangible, experiential, sort of cultural and political barriers that separate Gaza from the rest of the world. And I think that really left an impact on me, because in a sense this book is a representation of those intangible barriers, because all of the writers that contributed to this anthology had to write in English in order to appeal to a global audience. Not only do Palestinian writers have to experience like 75 years of occupation and have intergenerational trauma impact their families and their lives post-Nakba, they also have to translate their experiences and appeal to the broader world. And that made me really emotional, because I feel like there's been so much effort to describe what is going on in Gaza, what is going on in Palestine, what Israel is doing to the Palestinians, only for only for governments to completely ignore the humanity of the Palestinians and the atrocities of what's going on. Sorry. So that just made me really emotional. Another contributor to this anthology, his name is Rafat Al-Arir, he was killed in an Israeli airstrike on December 7th. He quotes, "How many more Palestinians should be massacred for the world to care about our lives?" And he wrote that a while ago. And that's still a question that we have to ask. How many more people have to die for this to end? You know what I mean? So yeah, highly recommend, you know, calling your representatives to ask for a ceasefire, to talk to your friends and family about what's going on. I know that things have been really scary out there because of, you know, people are getting a lot of backlash about speaking out against this. I know for me personally, I, along with every other employee at my workplace, received an email from HR saying that any statement against Israel would be interpreted as an act of anti-Semitism and would be addressed accordingly. So I know for me, that's been something that I think about a lot at work. So hopefully they don't watch this video and lose my job. But I don't know, I think it's really sad. More about the book, I think one piece that really stood out to me in particular is this piece that talks about Palestinian farmers, their cultural ties to the land and like the rich heritage, and like beyond that, the impact Israel has been having on the biodiversity and the environment of Palestine, the degradation that's been going on due to their land policies and the way they've been policing and controlling Palestinian farmers and what they can and can't export. To me, that was a really beautiful and heartbreaking blend between the science, like the environmental science behind degradation and biodiversity. Like, I was a biology major. I took a lot of courses on environmental degradation and pollution and land depletion, and tying that to Palestinian farmers and the resistance movement and like the long history behind peasant farmers and their role in resistant movement. So that was a really insightful piece that really touched me specifically. But I think because it's an anthology with a lot of different forms in it, like there's academic writing, there's poetry, there's short stories, there's like personal anecdotes, I think there's something for everyone if you decide to read this book, which I highly recommend. I got it as a free ebook from Haymarket Books. I don't know if they're still having that going on, but yeah, that's where I got it from. Would highly recommend. And the last book I rated 5 stars was Severance by Ling Ma. And I'm gonna be so honest with you all. I thought I had survived the COVID pandemic pretty well, you know, like I survived online classes, no one in my immediate family died, which was such a blessing. I graduated on time, I got a job, even though there's still COVID surges going on, but I basically thought, oh, I survived the COVID pandemic with like pretty much like nothing, like no like lasting damage from it, you know, that's great. But reading this book brought back so many dark memories of that time, and it really made me think about the ways in which COVID has permanently changed the way I interact with the world in some ways, and how scarring that period was, even though nothing physical happened to me, just like the mental impact it had, you know? And it's really shocking to me that this book was written and published before the pandemic even happened. The entire reading experience was just so eerie and anxiety inducing, and I don't know if I would have had such a visceral reaction to it had I read it before the pandemic, but definitely like reading it post-pandemic, that was a lot. Severance essentially tells the story of Candace Chen, an office worker in New York City, and it talks about her life before, during, and after the pandemic. And honestly, there's not really much going on in her life. Her boyfriend broke up with her, she has no friends, her parents are dead, so she's pretty like socially isolated. She's socially awkward, so she can't really make friends with like her coworkers or her roommates. Her life is just in general very like empty and devoid of anything really, like anything substantial. But the way the story like describes her and her life and how she got to that point and what she's doing now that the pandemic has hit, I think tells so much about like Candace as a character, and there's a lot of like overarching themes to it. And I think what this book really emphasized to me was the fact that I love ambiguous, difficult, introspective, complicated fiction. I like that the ending isn't cookie cutter clear. I like that she's not inherently a likable character. I like that there's so many like flaws that Candace herself like openly admits to, and it just made me think a lot more. Like, let me read you my review of it. So I wrote, there's a usual discussion that dystopia and apocalyptic fiction provokes, but on top of that, there's the Asian American immigrant tale of Candace and her parents, the complicated relationships between the three of them, the immigrant narrative, and the tension between Chinese and American culture, all of that. And there's so much more in terms of independence, freedom, nostalgia, and memory. And given more time, I could honestly parse out more themes from the book itself. I honestly wouldn't have expected any of that based on the summary of the book. Because the book summary mentions pandemic, I would have expected something more along the traditional lines of like zombie thriller, apocalypse fiction. But no, like this genuinely was a surprising read, not only for the emotions it provoked in me post-pandemic, but for all the themes that I described and just the richness of the text. I really, really love this book, and I think this is the book that got me to start reading more fiction, because prior to that, I had only ever really read a lot of nonfiction books. And even now, I still read majority nonfiction when it comes to books that I read for fun, but this is the book that got me thinking, oh, how can I incorporate more fiction into my reading life? So those were all the books that I rated 5 stars and 1 star in 2023, and now moving on to other media. In my Instagram post, I made like 3 playlists highlighting some of my favorite songs from that year, and so I just wanted to go through them. The first playlist I titled The Wound Won't Close, Give Me Back My Girlhood, and the title is from Woulda Coulda Shoulda by Taylor Swift. All the other songs with that playlist are kind of associated with like that emotional, like I gotta really wallow in my sadness kind of vibe. In general, I just like listening to sad songs. I don't know what that says about me, but basically like similar vibes, like songs that I would listen to like before and after therapy. So that's the first playlist. The second playlist, far more hopeful and loving than the first one. It's titled Enraptured in the Bluest Dark, I Captured Your Beating Heart, which is a lyric from Venus in the Sea by Have. I feel like Venus in the Sea and Love God by Sarah Kinsley have very similar vibes where it feels very ethereal. Like I think the imagery in Venus in the Sea is specifically like a siren, and I feel like that's a very good description for it, like siren-like. Love God by Sarah Kinsley was a breakout song for me. It was the first song I discovered by Sarah Kinsley, and recently she released a string version of it called the Diamond Edition, I think. Beautiful, beautiful song. Love, love, love Sarah Kinsley's music. Have, I think Venus in the Sea is definitely the standout song to me. I'm not as much of a fan of her other songs, although Moon Girl comes close. And then the third song, the third playlist is called Nobody Knows How to Punish Me Like Me, and that's a lyric from Punisher by K-Flay. This is like my workout song, like my more darker, more intense sort of playlist that I listen to when like I'm on like a run or like a silly little jog, or if I'm playing like video games. This is a playlist I listen to. So there's Punisher by K-Flay, which is a song, actually the entire playlist that my friend recommended to me. So YJ, if you're watching this, love you. Great album, loved it. Nocturne by Nina Utashiro is another standout. Nina Utashiro and K-Flay are, again, artists that I discovered in 2023, and I really enjoyed it. Eat Me by Demi Lovato and Royal the Serpent. I haven't listened to a Demi Lovato song in ages, and I feel like Eat Me really resonated with me because I identify as non-binary and I use she, they pronouns, but something that I've often, struggled with is like presenting very feminine, because at my workplace I find that I get treated with a lot more respect and a lot more, like, I guess, lenient when I present more feminine. And I've also had like a history of trying to defend like my queerness and my identity to other people in my life. So, just the lyrics of Eat Me really resonated with me. And then for Punisher specifically, I think I really related to it in terms of like the ways in which I purposely torment myself. Like I'm the type of person who needs to have control over everything. And again, says a lot about me, but the lyrics just really spoke to me. In Nocturne, I don't know what it means because it's Japanese. I don't understand it, but I like the vibes. In terms of video games, I'm really embarrassed to say this, but my most played video game of 2023 was Final Fantasy 14. I don't know, like it really grabbed me by the balls and like held me in a chokehold for the entirety of 2023. I only unsubscribed in like November, December-ish, but I played hours and hours and hours of that game. I like sped through the expansions with like rapid speed. And like now at the end of the year, I can't even tell you that like it's a good game to start because it's such a commitment. You know what I mean? Like for me, the game got really good in Heaven's Word and Shadowbringers, but I can't, in good faith, recommend this game to other people because the first expansion, I think it's called Realm Reborn. Realm Reborn is such a slog to get through, only to experience Heaven's Word. The third one, Stormblood or whatever, also not that great. Endwalkers, also not that great. But like to play so many hours of this game only for the second and the fourth expansions, I don't know, like I can't in good conscience recommend that to you. But if you have a lot of time to burn and you have friends to play it with, would recommend. The story is really good. The story is really good for the second and the fourth one. Like it's a really good game. It's just the gameplay mechanics and like especially for like the first expansion is just nothing to write home about. I don't know. I feel very conflicted about this game. However, my second most played game is Baldur's Gate 3, and I can recommend that with a lot more passion because it's genuinely such an interesting game. There's a lot of plot, a lot of character development. It's so like rich and dynamic in terms of the story choices that you can make. I've always been a really big fan of RPGs and plot-driven games, like very like character heavy games. I was a huge fan of Dragon Age and Mass Effect in high school, and Baldur's Gate 3 just serves it to you on like a silver platter. It's so amazing, like the level of detail that the developers put into the game. And I think what's really unique about this game is that the voice acting is so good and it's so extensive. Everything in the game is voiced except for like the main character that you choose, and even then a few voice lines here and there are still voiced. The quality of the game is so amazing and it's well worth the price, I think. Podcasts. 2023 was the year of the podcast for me because normally I'm not really a podcast type of person. I only ever really listened to The Adventure Zone in high school, and then I slowly like eased my way into maintenance phase. But for some reason this year I listened to a lot more podcasts than I normally do. Some notable examples are Bingetopia, again, maintenance phase, and then I started listening to If Books Could Kill, which is another podcast done by one of the co-hosts of maintenance phase, Michael Hobbs. Rehash was another one that stood out to me, and Scam Goddess. All of these podcasts were just so good, and I felt like they really enriched my life sort of, because I learned a lot of things I otherwise wouldn't have known about. And I think the reason why I listen to more podcasts this year is because I tend to listen to podcasts when I do chores or like mindless work at my job. So for example, if I'm at work assembling kits or like processing biosamples, like my brain is empty and I like can't live with myself in like a completely silent environment. I always have to have some form of music playing, or I have to be talking to someone, or I have to be listening to someone. So I was like, oh, why not just turn on the podcast? And so that's when I started really getting into it. I also think like Bingetopia and Maintenance Phase were like the first podcasts where I was like, oh my god, like these people are like so funny. Normally I don't really like it when podcast hosts try to be funny, but for some reason this year I've done like a complete 180, and now I'm like, if the host isn't funny, I can't listen to it. And then lastly, for TV, film, movies, I can't do it. I can't sit still for that long. I suck at watching TV. Like, I had to like sit down with another person to even watch the first season of Witcher, you know? Because I just can't sit still for that long, and even when I do watch something, I have to be doing something with my hands or doing something else to occupy like my brain space so that I can watch this movie or TV. So I feel like these are not necessarily recommendations because I don't have like a wide plethora to choose from. But I think one standout was American Psycho, because I went as Patrick Bateman for Halloween. So my friends insisted that I watch American Psycho, and I was like, ooh, this is like so silly goofy. Like, he's so baby girl in this movie. Like his skincare routine, Patrick Bateman's skincare routine, it's exactly like, what's that girl from Euphoria? The Cassie girl? Exactly the same. He's just like a teenage baby girl. And then the other one was House of the Dragon. I've never been a big like Game of Thrones girly. I don't know, something about like House of the Dragon really gripped me. I'm gonna be honest, I couldn't watch all of the scenes because I get kind of squeamish. I had to like skip through some of them. But I think one of my favorite scenes is when Alicent and Rhaenyra have that fight where Alicent goes like, where is duty? Where is sacrifice? And then Rhaenyra goes, exhausting, wasn't it? That was a crazy scene. That scene lives rent-free in my head. So that's my media recap of 2023. I have been filming for like 2.5 hours now, and it will probably be edited down into like a 20-minute video because I ramble too much for anyone. But thanks for watching. I don't really have anything else to say, but if you have any recommendations for like any podcasts, music, books, TV shows, anything like that, leave it down in the comments. I'm trying really hard to consume as much media as I physically can before I go off to med school. Like, I even watched TV. I watched the first season of Sex Education last week, and that's like a big accomplishment for me because I never watched TV. So yeah, let me know if you have any recommendations. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!